Well, this morning we're wrapping up this series, Fivefold. And Dale Kauffman is here to teach us about the shepherding gift that the Apostle Paul talks about in Ephesians 4, that Christ himself gave to the church, and some are apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers. And the purpose of these gifts is to equip God's people for works of ministry, works of service. So one of the great things about this teaching series is, number one, that everybody gets to play. That every person who is a part of the church has a gift to offer to the whole. That you are part of God's mission, whatever gift you're bringing. And another cool thing is that we get to hear from lots of different people who have these gifts. And so Dale's here this morning talking to us about being a shepherd, but Dale is also a shepherd. This is the gift, among others, but this is the gift that I think really stands out for him. Dale, how many of you know Dale? How many of you had chemistry with Dale maybe at the college? Some of you. Dale, his wife Vicky, their daughter Maddie, they were part of this South Hutch campus for many years, and about 2 years ago sensed a calling to actually join our pastoral team at Yoder. And to give some leadership there. And so it's doing a great job. It's awesome to see. I got to preach at Yoder last week. Just so cool to see what's happening there. And we're excited to have Dale here. Dale is a shepherd. Dale is one of the most caring, compassionate people I've ever met. I mean, in all honesty. Dale, I'm not sure, you can ask him afterwards how many cars that he has titles for right now that he doesn't know where they are because he's loaned them to people. If you have them, give them back. No, I'm just joking. But he just loves people, and so is incredibly generous with his stuff, with his time. And so, Dale, we're thrilled to have you here as a shepherd. So let's welcome Dale this morning.
I feel a little bit like the right-hand mirror on a car, where it says objects may appear larger than they really are. And Eric may have just made me feel larger than I really am. So, and to those of you who were in my chemistry class over the years and thought you'd never have to listen to me again, I'm sorry, but I'm back. Anyway, it's really good to be here today. And like I told the first two groups, it is really bright up here, and I can't see hardly any of you. And I said I'm not used to that because at Yoder, we just have gas lamps there. And it's not nearly so bright. So anyway, we are, if we could have a technical check, it's really echoing. Is it me or is that better? Yeah, we left the Grand Canyon. Thank you. Anyway, up on the screen you see this fivefoldsurvey.com. And if you haven't had a chance to look at that, I'd invite you to go home this afternoon and do it after lunch, before the ball game and the afternoon nap, because it's really an interesting thing to look at. And Vicki and I did that together a couple of weeks ago, about a month and a half ago when we started this series. And we first did ourselves, and then we did each other, and then we compared notes to check ourselves and see how well we knew each other. And it was really interesting. And having said that, if you do the survey and you find you're a shepherd or a prophet, that doesn't mean that you don't have the other gifts. We all have some of each one of those gifts. And we all have shepherding roles. So even if shepherding isn't your primary gift, you are a shepherd. If you have children, if you have parents, if you have grandchildren, if you have neighbors, if you have colleagues that you go to school with, we have shepherding roles in all aspects of our life. And so I think that it speaks to all of us when we talk about being a shepherd. Well, today I'm going to talk about shepherding. And normally when we think of shepherding, we think of sheep. And some of you may have sheep. I personally grew up with a few sheep, but we grew up with cows at our place. I was a dairyman, and so on a dairy farm. And so I learned a lot about relating to people by working with cows. And I always felt like that really helped me when I was a teacher for all those years, is because of my father's great shepherding skills and how he taught us to take care of animals and how important it was that we treat them with respect and that we look out for their needs along the way. And all those things have come in very helpful for me as I have been a teacher. this cow up here on the right, I don't normally interact with dairy cows, but I ran into her about 2 weeks ago south of Haven, about 6 miles one day. I was down there, and she just stood there by the road, and there was just an electric fence between us, and I was about as close as from here to the front row, so I took her picture. She wanted to be here today, and so as when I talk about shepherding, I will be telling you a lot of cow stories today as we go along. But my father taught me so much about how it's important to treat cows and animals with respect. And as we start talking about shepherding, I think that's kind of a baseline where we start with is respect. In the Bible, as we think of the Bible, there are so many places where the Bible stories, the writers talk about the role of shepherds. And the ancient role of a shepherd was to care for all aspects of the animal. So on any given day, if you were a shepherd that took care of sheep, you would take your sheep from the corral and you would lead them out into a pasture someplace that you knew of and help them find really good grass where they could eat and be filled. And you knew where the good water was for them, and you knew where the coyotes and the big cats lived, so you would keep your shepherds away from there, from predators. And it was your job as a shepherd to also watch to make sure that if you had a sheep that was limping or was falling back from the rest of the flock, that you would be able to be perceptive about that and go find that sheep and catch that sheep and see if you could doctor that sheep to keep them well. Because for the shepherd, if his sheep didn't do well, he and his family did not do well. So it was very important for his own benefit, but also the benefit of his family and his community, for him to take his shepherding very seriously. In Ezekiel 34, we have God talking through his prophet Ezekiel to the children of Israel and to the kings of Israel about their shepherding skills. And we need to back up a little bit. If you remember, at one point in time, the children of Israel asked God for a king. They wanted to have a king so they would be like all the other people around them. They were tired of just having a judge who was their leader. They wanted to have a king, so they had a real leader. And God warned them against having a king. If you remember, he said a king will tax you. A king will take away your sons and send them off to war. A king will always be fighting with the countries around you. And he said it's not going to be a good thing, but the people wanted a king. Well, then several hundred years later, Ezekiel was here, and God was coming back to take over the kingship of Israel because the kings had failed so miserably. And in the first part of Ezekiel 34, God gives a list of the things that the people had failed at. He says that they had used their flock without giving back. They had shorn their sheep, took the wool, sold it, and they did not use it to give benefit back to the flock. He said that they had left the injured and the sick just fall by the wayside. He said that sheep had strayed away and nobody did anything to go hunt for them and bring them back. They didn't care about those. The kings were only looking out for themselves, just like a shepherd who would only look out for himself. And God says, I'm going to come and I'm going to take over the shepherding role. And in the second half of Ezekiel 34, he says, as your good shepherd, I'm going to find those of you who are lost. I'm going to go after the strays, so to speak. He said, I'm going to look out for the weak among you, for the poor, and for those that have health issues. I'm going to look out for those like a good shepherd. He said, I'm going to find you the best pasture with the best food. And he said, I'm going to protect you from predators. And he says, that is what a good shepherd should be. And so if we look closely at this section from Ezekiel, you would find those following traits. A good shepherd is patient. A good shepherd is kind. A good shepherd is calm. They're perceptive, meaning they can see when there's a problem. If they see all the sheep with their ears up looking in a certain direction, there's probably a predator there, and they go look for that. They are respectful to their animals. They are persistent, meaning that they keep on task and keep the sheep doing what they're supposed to be doing. And they do all this in a very kind way. And those are traits of a good shepherd. And in Ezekiel then, he would say that our job description then is to feed them and to teach the sheep, to teach them how to go through very rough areas perhaps, to teach, to lead them to the proper place, to prepare them so that they would know if he makes a certain sound that they are supposed to have a certain response. And all of those things are part of the job description of a shepherd as given God in Ezekiel. Well, if we move ahead to the New Testament, Jesus is now there, and he's talking to the leaders of the Jewish synagogue at that time, the Pharisees, and he's talking to them about shepherds, because they understood shepherds, because their whole culture was built around shepherding and sheep. And in John chapter 10, and if you would like to follow along, you can in your Bible. I run it off so that I can see it with my multiple focus glasses, which I used to make fun of my father and all my old uncles because they could never find the right length, and now it's me. So I have size 40 font here. But let's look at John chapter 10, verses 1 through 6. Jesus said, "Let me set this before you as plainly as I can. If a person climbs over or through the fence of a sheep pen instead of going through the gate, you know he's up to no good. A sheep rustler. The shepherd walks right up to the gate. The gatekeeper opens the gate to him, and the sheep recognize his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he gets them all out, he leads them, and they will follow because they're familiar with his voice. They won't follow a stranger's voice, but will scatter because they aren't used to the sound of it." Now, my understanding is that in the culture of that time, in a village, many people had sheep. And if you had sheep, you took your sheep on any given day, took them out and grazed them. And at night, you would bring them back to the village and put them in a common pen or a common corral that was surrounded by a hedge or a fence. And then there was an opening to this place, and in that opening, a shepherd spent the night. There was either a gate or he laid right across that opening, so no one could get into the sheep or no sheep could get out without passing through that gate. So the gatekeeper was a very important function. And the fence was big enough and tough enough that anybody who would try to crawl over the fence was truly a thief. A sheep thief was not a person who was looking to get their sheep out of the pen. And then in the morning, when it was time to go back out to graze, if I understand correctly, and as Jesus says here, a shepherd would come to the corral. The shepherd would call his sheep with his own unique sound or by name. The sheep would come out, stand outside the pen, and when all his sheep were out, the shepherd would take off to grass. And then the next shepherd would come and get his sheep out until all the sheep were out of the pen. Now, my experience with sheep has never been that good or that clear cut. There was usually a lot of yelling involved because sheep and I just weren't as close as cows and I don't know, that sounds weird. But anyway, I did have a cow herd for many years. And I got to know them and they got to know me. And something I really enjoyed was particularly a really foggy night or a cold winter night, they might be grazing on stalks a half mile or more away. And I could go out in the yard in the dark, they couldn't see me, and I would just call them with a certain call. And I might hear a bit of a noise of a cow noise in the distance, and then it would be quiet. And you just sit there, and all of a sudden, you could just hear the pounding of hooves getting closer and closer and closer. And soon, 120 animals would just come roaring through the corral because they knew my voice. And that's all I had to do was call them, and they would just come roaring right to the barn. And I thought that was pretty cool. And that's the picture I get here, that the shepherd knows the sheep, and the sheep know his voice. And when he calls them, they came to him and then could be led out to pasture. Well, let's look what the rest of this passage in John 10 says. Jesus told this simple story, but they had no idea what he was talking about. So he tried again. I'll be explicit then, he said. I, Jesus, am the gate for the sheep. All those others are up to no good, sheep stealers, every one of them. But the sheep didn't listen to them. I am the gate. Anyone who goes through me will be cared for and will go in and out and find pasture. A thief is only there to steal and kill and destroy. I come so they can have real and eternal life, more and better life than they ever dreamed of. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd puts the sheep before himself, sacrifices himself as a necessary. A hired man is not a real shepherd. The sheep mean nothing to him. He sees a wolf coming, he runs for it, leaving the sheep to be ravaged and scattered by the wolf. He's only in it for the money. The sheep don't matter to him. I am the good shepherd. I know my own sheep, and my own sheep know me. In the same way, the Father knows me, and I know the Father. I put the sheep before myself, sacrificing myself if necessary. Jesus says not only is he the gate to the enclosure of safety that keeps predators out and keeps the sheep in a safe place, and the only access is to pass through him, but he says, not only am I the gate, I am the shepherd. I am the person who will call out to those sheep and lead them out to a better place. And he said, my sheep know my voice, and they will come to me. We, as people, have a dual role. We are shepherds, and like I said earlier, even though our main gift may not be shepherding, our main gift may be apostle or prophet or teacher, we are all shepherds in one form or another. But we are all shepherds, but we are also all sheep. And I'd like to look at that dual role just a little bit this morning, to talk to us, to those of us who are shepherds, and to those of us who are fulfilling shepherding roles. How does that work? And then to also talk to us about what it means to be a sheep and to be a good follower of Jesus. So I would ask you these questions this morning. If you're trying to decide if you're a shepherd, you remember a few years ago they had all these questions. You might be a redneck if. Well, you might be a shepherd if when you go to the grocery store or to buy gas at Quick Shop or wherever you're at, you see people and you just can't avoid talking to them. Is anybody like that? How many of you have a spouse like that? They see people and they want to talk. I didn't see that hand, Marlon. There we go. If you are like that, you're probably a shepherd. And my family would say, I'm like that. I like to visit with people. And if you see people hurting or in need, you can't ignore them. You reach out to them. And I struggle when I drive down the road and I see someone walking by the road. There's one part of me that yells out, you must stop and help this guy, okay, or this person. They need help. The other part of me is saying, Dale, he's a serial killer. He's Ted Bundy's brother, and he needs a ride. Don't pick him up. And a few years ago, I told the story earlier, I picked up a guy on K96 that looked questionable, and I'm still here today, so you know it all worked out. But the co-op manager from Haven, where I do a lot of business, called me just a couple minutes later on the phone, and he said, Dale, he said, I just saw you pick that guy up out there on the highway. I was driving by, and he said, I just wanted to know that we've appreciated your business over the years in case I never see you again. That's a true story. But you know, you just can't ignore people who have needs. And that's what being a shepherd's all about, is just reaching out to those people. And if you see people and you want to help them to have a better life, if you're a shepherd, you just want to do whatever you can to help them achieve their dreams. While doing and saying all that, there are some hazards if you're going to be a shepherd. If you're one of these people, you need to be aware that it can cause some problems. And I would take us to the story in Luke 15. You remember there's a story there where Jesus told about this shepherd that had 100 sheep, and 99 of them, he said, were in the corral. They were all locked up safe in the pen. And he said one sheep was missing. And he says it was a stormy night. Now, I don't know what that means, but for me, I've been out on stormy nights with animals, and it's raining and pouring rain, and it's lightning or snowing or sleeting, and you're going out looking for this one lost critter. And Jesus says this shepherd, the good shepherd, went out and hunted till he found that lost lamb, and he picked it up and he took it back to the flock. And he said there was great rejoicing because they found this one sheep, and he rejoiced with his neighbors. And he said the same is true in heaven. When one person that is lost, one stray, is retrieved and brought back to the kingdom, he says there's great joy in heaven. And so we, in doing that, as we are shepherds and work with people, the only good way to pick up a lamb or a baby calf on a cold and wet and rainy and miserable stormy night is you just pick it up in your arms like this, and you hang on to it, and you run for the pickup or the four-wheeler or whatever. And I can guarantee this, when you get back to the house, you're going to smell like a sheep or a cow. It doesn't matter what you do, you're going to smell like a sheep. And that's why I have that up there. If you're a shepherd, you're going to smell like a sheep. And that's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean you become a sheep, but it means you're going to be working with people in situations that are going to change who you are. And you're going to be different to the people you normally hang out with. They're going to look at you and say, wow, what's been going on with you? You're hanging out with these people, and it's changing you. You're becoming more, you're different. You're caring for people that we never really used to talk to or we never used to hang out with. What's going on? And that's part of being a shepherd. You're going to smell like sheep. Having said that, shepherds tend to get over-engaged. There's opportunities to help people everywhere. And you can become over-engaged and over-involved with people's lives. And pretty soon, you can also enable people. And if you enable people, that means you're doing the hard work that they ought to be doing for themselves. And so you have to be cautious about that. That you're, in helping them, you're helping them to make good choices and move along, and that you're not doing the hard work for them. And then right under that, we have this idea that we may neglect people who we are close to. People who are closest to us, our families, our spouses. Persons that we are very close to sometimes have to sacrifice because of our shepherding behavior. And we just need to be aware of that. My wife's incredibly patient. I'll just say that right there. She's watched me drink iced tea on the deck out the kitchen window for hours and hours and hours, and she seldom, if ever, complains. She never complains. Now she prays. But now and then she'll say, Dale, you know, we do have a long list of things here that need to be done, but I know that's important too. And so it takes a special communication with your spouse or family so that you don't neglect them if you're a shepherd. You also have to be cautious that you don't become discouraged and become burned out. It's like, man, I help all these people, I work on all these situations, and it never changes a thing. You know what? We can't measure those changes. Those changes are sometimes just little seeds that are planted that over time will grow. And it may happen long after you've been there when the results will show up. And so don't let discouragement lead to burnout. Now I have one other thing on there. It says it may upset the apes. That's another shepherding hazard. And what do I mean by that? The apes are the apostles, the prophets, and the evangelists. And you've heard from them a couple weeks ago over time. But apostles, prophets, and evangelists, they can see where we are today, and they can see where we want to be, and they have a clear plan on getting there. And they know they have a schedule. Are any of you apostles, prophets, and evangelists? Anybody done that? Yeah, I see some hands. And you have a clear path to get there, and these people along the way can cause you to be detoured from that path. Does that make sense? And it can cause stress. So shepherds can sometimes cause stress for the apes. Now, out at Yoder, we on our ministry team, we have some of each of these gifts. And I'm kind of the shepherd guy, and there are others that are apostles and prophets. And because of that, I can cause them stress. For example, about a month ago, my wife had a birthday on a Sunday, and I, of course, as always, planned well ahead. And at 7 o'clock, I thought, man, I would have a card for my wife. And so I decided to run to Walmart and get a card before church. And I had to be at church at 9 o'clock. Everything was good. I ran to Walmart. I was coming to the checkout counter at 8:30, a half hour from Walmart to Yoder, easy run. I see some people there who should have been in church because they're from first hour and they chose to go to second hour that day, they said. But they were going to the checkout counter, so we chatted a little bit, 5 minutes or so. Okay, it's 8:35. Things are good. I'll still make it because I'm supposed to be there at 9 o'clock so we can pray. Well, guess what? These people left, and around the corner came my old boss, who I'd worked for years and who's now running for an office in the state. And he was so happy to see me, and he wanted my vote too, I think. Anyway, he wanted to talk, and we talked for probably 5 or 6 minutes, and now it's 8:45, and I'm thinking if I really hurry, I can get this card, get out the door, rush to and get there by 9 o'clock. And wouldn't you know it, I'm there in the checkout lane, and here's this big pile of groceries, and a lady's writing a check, and she stands up, and she goes, Dale, I haven't seen you in a couple years. How are you? And it was a lady who used to work at the FSA office here in South Hutch. And if you're a farmer, you know what the FSA office is. It's your home away from home where you spend hours each year. And this was Bobby, and she wanted to tell me about her family and her husband and wanted to know about my family. And I'm sitting there looking at the clock up there on the wall, and I'm thinking, boy, at Yoder, they're getting nervous. And wouldn't you know it, by the time she and I got done talking, it was 5 after 9. And I quickly check out, and I think I got to get a text off to the apes waiting out at Yoder. And I head for the door, and here comes another guy. This guy was from second service here. And so we had to talk a little, and I got to Yoder about 9:20. And there was some tension because Dale the shepherd had stood up the apes because I was supposed to be there at 9. But you know what? We can work through that, and we can talk about it because we each have different gifts. And there are times when their eagerness to get from point A to point B, they could run over some people, and my shepherding feelings may keep people from getting run over. And there are times when my shepherding can slow things down so badly that we'll never get to point B. And so we need each other. And that's the beauty of these gifts that that the Spirit gives us, is by putting all those gifts together, we form a unit that is better than we would be by ourselves. And so every one of those gifts is important. But there are hazards with being a shepherd. Well, let's move on ahead. And lastly, I want to look at this one thing, and that is you are a sheep. We're also all sheep, whether we like that designation or not. And as a sheep, I ask you this question this morning. Are you comfortable letting Jesus be the shepherd of your life and letting him choose your path? Am I comfortable letting Jesus be the shepherd of my life and letting him choose my path? We live in a culture, we exist in a corral, so to speak, or in a pen, where there are many, many voices who come to the gate and who would call us out of the corral. All you have to do is turn on the TV or the radio these days, or look at the internet, and there are voices of all kinds calling out, saying, you ought to be this, you ought to believe this, you ought to believe that. Would you agree? There's all kinds of voices. And through that all, there is one voice that's unchanging, and that's the voice of Jesus. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. My sheep know my voice, and I know my sheep, and I call them by name. And I would say this to us today, that we, on a daily basis, have to make a decision about which voices we want to listen to. Do we want to listen to the voices that are just bombarding us from media? Or do we want to listen for the voice of Jesus and just beam in on that voice, connect to that voice, and follow him? Follow him from the corral where he promises to lead us to good places, to lead us through the rough spots. Culture tells us, follow them. And they try to make it very, very attractive. But we have to tune into the voice of Jesus. And that's something I invite you to think about this week. Am I totally tuned in to the voice of Jesus? Jesus said again in John chapter 10, verse 27, my sheep listen to my voice. I know them. I know them. He knows us. He knows our name. He says, I give them eternal life and they shall never perish. Why would we want to follow another shepherd? And then he says, later on in that chapter, I come so they can have real and eternal life, more and better life than they ever dreamed of. And so today I ask you to just think about that a little bit. Is your life today more and better than you ever dreamed of? Is it more and better than you ever dreamed of? And if it's not, I would say that Jesus is still offering that. He's still offering a more and better life than you could have ever dreamed of. And all we have to do is listen to that voice and to connect with Jesus, because he knows our name, he's calling our name, and he would want to invite us out of the corral of the culture in which we live to follow him to greener pastures.